Proposed amendments to the dentist's registration ordinance to alleviate manpower shortage in the profession. A government proposal to allow non-locally trained nurses to register in Hong Kong without undergoing exams. And U.S. intelligence agencies identify China as the principal threat to Washington. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. The government is proposing amendments to the dentist's registration ordinance to alleviate manpower shortage in the city's dental services. That includes letting in non-locally trained dentists into Hong Kong and mandating a 2-year service in public institutions for local dental graduates.
For years, those wishing to consult a dentist in government clinics for free have to wait for a long time, prompting many to pay more for private dental care. Like this man who says his waiting time is up to almost 2 years, adding that it's too long for people with emergency dental needs. The government is now planning to amend the dentist's registration ordinance to allow non-locally trained dentists to practice in the city. They must work in public medical institutions for at least 3 years. Things may change for aspiring dentists trained locally as well. Authorities are proposing the addition of a 1-year internship period for dental graduates before their registration, something that is currently not required. They must work as an intern for the Department of Health, Hospital Authority, or any institution designated by the Health Secretary for 1 year in order to get their registration. The amendments also include mandating those trained locally who are non-specialists serve in public institutions, tentatively for 2 years after their registration. As for locally trained dental specialists, if their training is supported by the Department of Health, they must continue working with the department, preferably between 2 and 5 years. In Hong Kong, there are only 3.7 dentists per 10,000 people, a figure that's lagging behind many countries or territories. The city's dental association thinks the addition of an internship or mandatory obligation period will deter people from pursuing dental studies.
1 year internship and or the 2-year public service obligation, can it be performed during the 6-year curriculum? Or can the PSO perform during their private practice?
Wong said retaining manpower is the key to alleviate the problem of talent drain in the sector in the near future.
The government has proposed another amendment that will allow non-locally trained nurses to register in Hong Kong without undergoing exams. Timothy Lee spoke to a nursing school principal about how such institutions are stepping up their efforts to address the manpower shortage.
With the city having faced a nurse shortage for years, the government has suggested amending the nurses' registration ordinance to allow for the hiring of qualified non-locally trained nurses to address the manpower issue. Currently, local universities, as well as nursing schools under the Hospital Authority, provide over 2,000 nursing student places each year. Students who complete the courses will be eligible to apply to be a registered nurse. According to last year's Joint University Programs Admission System, HKU's nursing program is the most sought after, with more than 2,000 people fighting for just 210 student places. On average, that's 9 students against 1. As for the CUHK program, almost 1,900 applied for the course. That only accepts 217 students. PolyU and the Metropolitan University currently provide about 200 and 500 student places for their nursing programs. Each year, 300 students are enrolled to the Hospital Authority's nursing schools. In a bid to boost numbers in the nursing profession, Tonghua College increased its student places from the original 350 to more than 500. Its principal believes that the authority's decision to attract more nurses to the city will not do much to solve the underlying problem.
I have to say that bringing in foreign nurses is not a way to overcome the problem of nursing shortage. I know that we have a lot of committed nurses in Hong Kong. They left the service not because they don't like nursing. We just need to retain them and also attract those nurses who have left the service to come back to the clinical to work. So for example, give them appropriate reward.
Meanwhile, some students said they remain committed to the nursing industry despite the fierce competition and hardships in the field.
In my childhood, I'm always got sick and got accident in the childhood. During the hospitalization, I observed lots of nurses and doctors are very taking care of us. My dream is very simple, is to helping the patients to become better.
Students at Tonghua College have the opportunity to learn more about managing patients with asthmatic attacks with high-fidelity simulator models like this. The school hopes that more in the city will have the opportunity to join the nursing profession. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
Lawmaker David Lam thinks authorities should have better gatekeeping for the tendering of building maintenance. That comes after a series of ceiling collapses in public hospitals involving the same contractor in charge of maintenance. The latest inspections show there were cracks on the ceiling and walls in a staff-changing room at Queen Elizabeth Hospital. The hospital explained it is undergoing construction works and concluded there are no structural problems. Consultant firm Fujitec is in charge of the maintenance of more than 40 hospitals around town. Medical sector lawmaker David Lam says it's clear there have been problems with the government's decision-making with the tendering process. He also called on frontline workers to report to supervisors if they find any problems. Starting next month, CLP Power will offer a 3-month special fuel rebate to its customers to cap the fuel cost adjustment at 62.8 cents per unit of electricity. The power company said it hopes to support the community amid the post-pandemic economic recovery. It's estimated that the rebate between April and June will be around $80 million to $100 million. The company also said if the international coal and oil prices continue to stay at low levels, there will be a reduction in the fuel cost adjustment for its customers. Elizabeth Tang, wife of jailed pro-democracy activist Lee Cheuk-yan, was reportedly arrested today on suspicion of collusion with a foreign country and external elements. It's believed officers from the National Security Department of the police apprehended Tang outside Stanley Prison this afternoon. She previously served as the Secretary General of the now-defunct Hong Kong Confederation of Trade Unions. Founded in 1990, the group was once a major union in the city, but was disbanded 2 years ago. Former leader of the group Lee Cheuk-yan, meanwhile, is behind bars in connection with unlawful assembly cases, and he still faces trial on charges, including inciting others to subvert state power. Overseas, in a hearing on Wednesday, leaders of U.S. intelligence agencies identified China as the principal threat to Washington. The comments coincided with the release of the intelligence agency's annual global threat assessment, which also highlighted that Russia could be gearing up for a prolonged conflict in Ukraine. Beijing hit back at the U.S. report, calling it a misrepresentation of facts and a smear against China. Daniel Rao tells us more.
The hearing of the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee coincided with the release of Washington's annual Global Threat Assessment report. This year, it's largely focused on China and Russia. The report asserted that Beijing will build on actions from 2022 in the South China Sea, which could include more Taiwan Strait crossings or missile overflights of Taiwan. During the hearing, Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines said the Chinese Communist Party poses the biggest threat to Washington.
In brief, the CCP represents both the leading and most consequential threat to U.S. national security and leadership globally, and its intelligence-specific ambitions and capabilities make it, for us, our most serious and consequential intelligence rival. During the past year, the threat has been additionally complicated by a deepening collaboration with Russia, which also remains an area, obviously, of intense focus for the intelligence community.
Meanwhile, Senator Marco Rubio asked FBI Director Christopher Wray about whether Beijing could use TikTok to control data and millions of U.S. users, as well as utilize the app to sow division amongst the American public.
Yes, and I would make the point on that last one in particular that we're not sure that we would see many of the outward signs of it happening if it was happening.
Beijing hit back at the U.S. report. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said the report is a misrepresentation of facts and a smear against China. She stated that US attempts to bring down China are the root cause of the tensions in bilateral relations and that Beijing is not looking to replace or undercut anyone. Mao added the various reports by the US side are trying to hype up the so-called China threat narrative and that Washington is just trying to seek a pretext for its military expansion and maintenance of military hegemony and needs to work with China to bring bilateral relations back to the right track. On Russia, the US Global Threat Report asserted Moscow's military is unlikely to recover enough this year to make major territorial gains in Ukraine, which could give Russian President Vladimir Putin reason to prolong the conflict. Dan Orell, TVB News.
Russian missiles struck cities across Ukraine in the early hours of today, including the capital, Kiev, the Black Sea port of Odessa and Kharkiv. This while Ukrainians repelled fierce assaults on the beleaguered town of Bakhmut. Meanwhile, the United Nations has called for the extension of a deal with Moscow to allow Ukraine to export grain via Black Sea ports during the conflict. Tracy Furness has more.
Kiev's mayor said there were explosions in the southwestern part of the city in the early hours of Thursday. Power had to be cut. Around 7 a.m., more explosions were heard. He said 2 people had been injured and taken to hospital. Later, Ukrainian emergency workers were seen in residential areas of the city hosing down cars that were on fire. Attacks struck a wide arc of targets, including 5 cities in central and western Ukraine. There were no immediate reports of casualties there. Late Wednesday, Ukraine's military said its forces had pushed back intense Russian attacks in Bakhmut, despite a Russian claim of control of the city's eastern half. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the year-long war. Ukrainian defenders last week appeared to be preparing for a tactical retreat, but have remained defiant. Meanwhile, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres visited Kiev on Wednesday to discuss the Black Sea grain export deal with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. The deal that had brokered in Istanbul last year is due to roll over on March 18th. It allows Ukraine to export grain from its Black Sea ports and permits Russia to export food and fertilizers, and has so far exported 23 million tons of grain from Ukraine ports.
I want to underscore the critical importance of the rollover of the Black Sea Grain Initiative on 18 March and of working to create the conditions to enable the greatest possible use of export infrastructures through the Black Sea in line with the objectives of the initiative.
And the European Union's foreign policy chief said Wednesday that the next few weeks will be critical in the conflict in Ukraine and urged Western nations to deliver more assistance faster.
The Ukrainian armed forces need our continuing support, in particular, and this was the core discussion today, on artillery ammunition. It was also the message that we have heard from President Zelensky some days ago at the European Union Council. And on that, time is of essence. We need to deliver more, but we need to deliver faster.
Josep Borrell Fontelles said the remarks following a 2-day informal meeting of EU defence ministers in Stockholm, which was also attended by the Ukrainian defence minister. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
In the U.S. state of West Virginia, a freight train derailed early on Wednesday after it struck a rock slide near a river. CSX Corporation said all 4 locomotives of its train and 9 empty coal cars derailed. The company said the lead locomotive caught fire before spilling diesel fuel into a nearby river. 3 crew members were sent to hospital and are now being treated for non-life-threatening injuries. CSX added no hazardous materials were being transported by the train and the incident posed no danger to the public. The derailment comes just over a month after another freight train derailed in Ohio, causing cars carrying toxic vinyl chloride and other hazardous chemicals to spill and catch fire. Still ahead on tonight's news. Georgia's ruling party withdraws a controversial foreign agents bill. Bishop of the Catholic Diocese of Hong Kong will visit his Beijing counterpart next month. Welcome back to TVB News. The Bishop of the Catholic Diocese of Hong Kong, Stephen Chow, will visit Beijing next month for 5 days. The bishop said he had received an invitation from Bishop Joseph Lee of the Diocese of Beijing at the end of last year. Chow will travel alongside Auxiliary Bishop Joseph Ha and the Vicar General Father Peter Choi on April the 17th. The bishop said he hopes the trip will promote exchanges and interactions between the two sides. Television Broadcasters Limited says its livestream commerce activity on the mainland is still in early stages and its future contribution to the group cannot be ascertained yet. Investors are advised to be cautious when dealing in the company's shares. This comes after the first live-stream commerce session conducted by the group's subsidiary TVB on the mainland's e-commerce platform Taobao recorded total sales of 23.5 million yuan on Tuesday. That's approximately 26.5 million Hong Kong dollars. Hosted by TVB's artists, the 6-hour session drew over 3.2 million viewers and was watched over 4.85 million times. The company's shares soared more than 30% this morning before dipping. The board of the company considers live stream commerce an opportunity to realize additional values. TVB has planned over 48 live streams on Taobao within this year and seeks to develop similar partnerships with other mainland e-commerce platforms in future. Elsewhere, Georgia's ruling party is scrapping a controversial foreign agents law after a second night of unrest in the country's capital city. Demonstrators criticized the plan to make organizations reveal overseas investment, saying it mirrored Russian legislation. David Garrett reports.
Another tumultuous night in Tbilisi, a fire in one of the main streets in the Georgian capital with protesters on one side and police nearest the camera. Large numbers of people returned to argue against a rule that organisations receiving more than 20% of their funding from foreign sources must register as foreign agents. Around 100 people were detained. In some areas around the Parliament building, things became violent. Thousands in opposition to the proposals had returned with a clear message. The move the government made on Tuesday to implement what critics call a Russian law must be overturned.
It's absolutely against the Georgians' will. So whenever the ruling party contradicts the whole nation, the victory is just around the corner.
Police used water cannon and tear gas again, but unlike Tuesday, on Wednesday there were no signs of demonstrators throwing petrol bombs or stones at officers. And as those behind riot shields steeled themselves for running battles, those massed against them would have their voices heard. Today, the proposed law was dropped in a spectacular U-turn. Earlier, a march to commemorate International Women's Day and highlight problems that Georgian girls are facing was taken over by the political events of the day.
Now we are protesting against the Russian law that the Georgian government is trying to take and bring in the country. We are here and we are ready to fight, to prove what Georgians really want. We want the European future.
Georgians have got their wish. A statement says the bill has caused controversy in society. For this reason, it has been decided to unconditionally withdraw the bill without any reservations.
We are not gonna leave this country to Russia, and these Russian people who are ruling our country with a Russian style, we are not against any Russian people. Many Russians are joining us here because they know what happened in Russia and they do not want this thing to happen here again.
The government release argued, however, that the initiative was presented in a negative light. It said a certain part of the population was misled. The Georgian Dream Party claimed the bill was labelled falsely as a Russian law, although, as far as these people are concerned, it appeared too similar to one in Russia, which has been used to silence critics. David Garrett, TVB News.
There were huge protests in Greece as the anger from last week's train crash shows no signs of subsiding. More than 50,000 people in various cities marched towards government buildings, but in Thessaloniki there were violent scenes. As night fell on Greece's second-largest city, petrol bombs and fireworks were thrown at riot police. The deadly collision has sparked widespread fury aimed at national institutions as protesters blame the Prime Minister's lack of investment in the railways for causing the crash. 57 people died when a commuter service heading for this city hit a freight train near Larissa. These opposition marches were the largest the ruling party has seen since taking power in 2019. The peaceful demonstrators consisted mostly of students, teachers, and transport workers. And that's the news. Thanks for watching.